The wind does not forget. It coils up the mountainside like a whisper in an old tongue, carrying with it the ash of forgotten prayers and the scent of something once sacred. Burnt oak, smoldered wool, the faint trace of rose oil long since dried on a martyr's skin. High above the Languedoc Valley, the ruins of Montségur claw at the sky like broken fingers, silhouetted against the cloudless dusk. Here, silence is not absence, it is weight. It presses on the bones of the earth, heavy with the breath of those who refused to bow. A single crow turns overhead, its cry lost to the sweep of wind across jagged stone. Below, the fortress ruins yawn open in fractured quiet. This was once the last bastion of the Cathars, the perfects who would not kneel to Rome. Their voices have been gone for nearly 8 centuries, but their defiance still sings in the cracks between these stones. One can almost see the flicker of torchlight behind the cold walls, the long shadows of haggard men and veiled women gathered in whispered counsel, their parchment prayers held close to breast. It is 1243. Montségur is besieged. Inside the stone keep, the air is thick with damp and dread. Bread is rationed like coin, and firewood burns in handfuls. Children curl in straw, their cheeks pale beneath soot. An old man sharpens a rusted blade not for war, but for ritual, a sign, a gesture of readiness. Outside, the Crusaders wait. They are many, armored, righteous, paid. They believe themselves purifiers, but within Montségur's walls, belief runs deeper than steel. It is etched into every breath. The Cathars do not beg for life. They prepare for death as one prepares for sleep, with solemn grace. The fortress sits on a pog, a steep, flat-topped mountain, treacherous to climb, impossible to forget. For 9 months, the Crusader army tries to take it. Siege engines groan, rocks fall, blood seeps into soil. A hidden path once used for messages and food is discovered. The noose tightens, and still the Cathars pray. They believe in duality, 2 worlds, 2 gods, one of light and spirit, one of flesh and rot. This world, they say, is a cage of matter, a trap spun by the false god of corruption. To die well is to escape. To burn in truth is to rise. The priests of Rome call them heretics, but to the Cathars, Rome is the deceiver, its church an empire of gold and murder. In the final weeks, Montségur becomes a monastery of resistance. Baptisms are whispered under torchlight. Forgiveness is passed like water. The perfects bless the others, one by one, with hands worn thin by frost and prayer. They do not speak of salvation, they speak of release. And then the breach comes. On the morning of March 16, 1244, under the rising eye of the sun, the gates are opened. Not in surrender, in readiness. Over 200 believers descend the mountain under guard, led not in chains but in robes. They are offered a choice: recant and live. Deny your faith and your life will continue. But for the Cathars, to deny is worse than death. It is rebirth into a world they've long renounced. None of them recant. A pyre is built at the base of the hill, wood stacked like scaffolding, dry, thick, ready to consume. They step into it singing. A single hymn, it rises like smoke, steady and unwavering, until it is silenced by flame. From above, the remaining stone of the fortress bears witness. The keep where their sacred texts were read. The alcove where a mother once kissed her child's brow before sending him into night. The doorway still marked by soot, where one last torch sputtered before the final descent. The ash from that day still mingles with the soil. Every spring, wildflowers bloom on the slope, blood-red poppies, pale blue flax, and yellow broom. They say the ground remembers. Montségur was never rebuilt. The Inquisition would chase the last Cathars through forests and valleys, through caves and cellars, until their voices dissolved into legend. But here, among these fractured stones, their truth lingers. Not in triumph, in endurance. The wind still curls through empty halls, stirring dust in patterns like script. Pilgrims come, some speak, most do not. They walk the narrow path up the pog in silence, as if each footstep were a vow. They touch the walls not to learn, but to remember, to feel the chill that never left. In the corners of this ruin, there are things no history book will tell you. There is the scent of cold pine on the breath of dusk, the scratch of wind against lichen-covered stone, the echo of a child's laugh silenced too soon, the ghost sound of a final hymn beneath a sky the color of ash. And there, near the east wall, where the light falls just right through the missing roof, there is a shadow, small, still, as if someone is kneeling. A perfect, perhaps, or simply the memory of devotion carved into rock. The story of Montségur does not end here. It turns like a page smudged by fire toward the ones who ran, toward the children hidden in caves, toward the parchments buried in salt barrels carried east across mountains, toward the embers that never quite died. For faith, when crushed, does not vanish. It travels. And in the next chapter, we follow those who carried it, not in books or blades, but in song, into exile, into secrecy, into a world where truth lived not in churches but in whispers, where belief had to be hidden beneath cloaks and lullabies, where the fire still burned, softly, in silence, in the dark. The first sound is a drip, soft, persistent, like a slow clock echoing through the ribs of the earth. Then comes the hush, vast and damp, swallowing all movement. Here, beneath the fields of Picardy, where wheat sways above and crows circle high, lies a world carved by trembling hands, a city beneath a city, rooms hidden in chalkstone, narrow passageways where no wind blows, where time seems trapped in dust. The underground village of Naours. We begin in shadow. A single lantern flickers down a corridor, scratched with names. The flame dances against the stone, casting strange silhouettes, walls that bend like parchment, doorways no taller than a child. The air is close, touched with centuries of breath, laced with old smoke and dried lichen. A faint smell of wool, iron, and spilled tallow hangs in the stillness, a scent that speaks not of death, but of quiet survival. Above ground, the world burns. It is the mid-14th century. War rides heavy across France. The Black Death takes what the sword does not. Soldiers burn crops, lords demand tax and blood, people vanish. But here, in the bowels of the limestone, families forge a different path. Not through defiance, but disappearance. Whole communities descend into the belly of the earth, bringing with them hope, fear, memory. They build with hands cracked from labor and lungs full of dust, chapels hewn into chalk, lofts for storing flour, a forge, a bakery. Walls where prayers are scratched in Latin and Old Picard, and where time is measured by candle melt and silence. Children are born here, far from sun. Their first sight is not sky but stone. Their cries echo like birds in a sealed cage. Mothers wrap them in linen still warm from their bodies. Fathers place fingers to lips, hush their joy into whispers. Because above, the enemy listens. These tunnels were sanctuary, but they were also tombs in waiting. The fear was constant, a single mistake, a trail of smoke, the scrape of a boot on surface soil. And the soldiers might descend. That dread stained everything. Meals eaten in silence, fires doused with damp cloth, stories told in low voice, if at all. And yet life persisted. A girl kneels in one alcove, grinding wheat with a worn stone. Her hands are blistered, her back bent. She hums an old chant beneath her breath, a thread of song that her mother taught her, a song once sung in fields. Her brother plays with a bone doll, its face worn smooth, its limbs bound by string. Their grandmother stirs a thin broth of roots and lentil, her ladle carved from ash wood, her face lined with ash-gray memory. No sunlight reaches them. Seasons are guessed by smell. Mildew in spring, the dry rot of summer roots, the acrid tang of smoke when winter returns and brings men with it. In one chamber, a priest murmurs mass. His voice is soft, and the Latin words dissolve into chalk dust as he moves. No relics, no vestments, just a crucifix etched into stone and a scrap of cloth dyed wine dark. The faithful kneel in the cold, heads bowed not from grandeur but from grief, for what they have lost, for what they may never again see. This is not defiance. It is preservation. Above, kings fight for thrones, flags rise and fall, towns change hands like coins. But below, in Naours, a different history unfolds, not written in parchment or decree, but in breath, bread, and bone. These people ask for no glory. They carve their days in stone. Over time, the tunnels swell with the weight of generations. Graffiti lines the walls, prayers, names, dates. A mother records her child's height in charcoal notches. A boy draws a knight with a bent sword. Someone leaves a single copper coin wedged in a crack, a wish perhaps, or payment to a god deeper than light. Outside, the war ends, then returns. Another king, another flag, another lie. The people retreat again, always back to the silence. By the 1600s, the tunnels are no longer refuge but relic. Dust covers the hearths, bread molds in forgotten ovens, rats nest in the cradles, and still, the chambers breathe. Footsteps echo where none walk. The air remembers the heat of bodies. The walls hold the taste of human sorrow, sweet and raw. And in 1887, they are found again. A scholar, drawn by whispers and local myth, descends with a lantern. He finds a world untouched by sunlight. He writes of underground towns, of chapels and bakeries, of stories that never left the stone. But he does not know their names. The people of Naours have long vanished, their bones scattered or buried, their language fading like soot on the wall. He documents, catalogs, lights the tunnels for tourists, but some rooms stay sealed, too narrow, too deep, or too sacred, because some echoes do not want to be heard. Even now, beneath the picnic fields and playgrounds of Picardy, beneath the roots of trees and rusted plows, the tunnels of Naours remain. Their breath is slow, their silence thick. Tourists walk the halls with cameras, but the chalk does not care. It remembers only the weight of those who came here not for wonder, but for refuge. For those who carried no banners, wore no crowns, who lived in hunger, in love, in fear. The story does not end here, because not all buried things are dead. The next chapter waits in another hollow, in a Yorkshire valley where graves were burned, not dug, where villagers feared that even in death the world was not safe, where silence gave way to fire, and superstition became salvation. And so we follow the echoes again, from tunnels of chalk to trenches of ash, from those who hid to those who hunted the dead. The field is quiet now, wrapped in fog that rises like breath from the soil. A low mist drapes the hill, curling around broken stone and hollow graves, as if the earth itself is mourning. Beneath the withered arms of blackthorn trees and shattered archways of what was once a church, the village of Wharram, Percy, lies in silence. The wind moves slowly here. It carries no voices, only the rustle of dry grass and the whisper of long-buried secrets. But in the dirt, the story remains. One skull, seared and split, another with its face turned inward as if ashamed. Burnt bones, bones with blade marks, bones arranged in postures no burial rite would allow. Not laid to rest, but subdued, silenced. A ritual of fear, not farewell. The first breath of this story is not taken in life, but in death. In the late Middle Ages, Wharram Percy was a small village like many in Yorkshire. A handful of timber-framed homes, a church at the center, smoke rising from hearths where stews simmered and children dreamed beneath straw-thatched roofs. But its people lived on the edge, not just of empire or wilderness, but of the unknown. Hunger walked the same paths they did. Disease knew their names. Faith kept them afloat, but barely. And in the cracks of that fragile world, fear took root. It began with the dying. The Black Death swept through, invisible and merciless. Fields stood unharvested. Bells tolled too often. Graves filled faster than they could be dug. And then came the unease. The notion that some who were buried did not stay buried. That hunger did not end with death. That the dead might wake and wander. Revenants, they whispered. Corpse walkers. Restless ones. The stories crept from fire-lit corners of cottages, passed from trembling lips to eager ears. A mother says she saw her son's ghost scratching at the door. A shepherd swears the cattle grew restless at night. Look, their eyes fixed on the forest path where a freshly buried man had once walked. A child refuses to sleep, claiming the old woman who died last week stood at the edge of her bed. And so the village turned to fire. The bones found centuries later tell the tale. Bodies dug up, skulls split asunder, thigh bones broken, ribs pierced with blades. And then the remains burned, not in a funeral rite, but as a warning. Not a release, but a containment. This was not mourning. It was fear made flame. One skeleton, that of a man in his 40s, had his head removed and placed at his feet. His femurs snapped clean. Knife scores marked his spine. Another, a woman, showed burns across the chest and hands. What had they done to deserve this? Nothing. Only the misfortune of dying in a world unraveling, a world that no longer trusted the dead to stay dead. The soil of Wharram Percy is dense with sorrow. Archaeologists speak of rural superstition, of local folklore turned ritual. But listen deeper, and you'll hear something more human. The terror of watching your child waste away and wondering not just if God is listening, but if the grave can lie. If pain might walk back through the door. If death, like winter, could return again and again, hollow-eyed and silent. The rites were not church-sanctioned. The church buried its dead whole, blessed, facing east. But these were private acts. Acts done at dusk, perhaps by a few, perhaps with the consent of many, a secret liturgy of fire and fear, somewhere between protection and desecration. And yet, even within that terror, there is something telling. It speaks to the desperation of belief. When faith in saints and sacraments faltered, when Latin prayers could not stop the plague, the people turned to older truths, to fire, to blade, to soil. They turned inward, not toward God, but toward survival. What power does it take after burying a loved one to exhume their body, to break it, to burn it? There is grief in that act, and guilt. Perhaps a woman knelt beside a shallow grave, hands trembling, whispering an apology as she struck the bones of her sister. Perhaps a boy stood guard while his father pulled charred ribs from the ash. Perhaps no one spoke. Only the fire did. In time, Wharram Percy emptied. Enclosures, sheep grazing, hunger, abandonment. By the 16th century, it was gone. The roofs collapsed. Walls crumbled. The church held on longer than most. Stone outlasts skin. But even the church bells went silent. And beneath that silence, the graves waited. Centuries passed. Then, in the 20th century, spade struck bone. What they found did not speak of peace. It spoke of unease, of unfinished stories, of villagers who feared that even in death, danger lingered. The archaeologists cataloged, documented. They gave numbers to skeletons, dates to layers of soil. But the deeper truth lies not in carbon dating, but in shadow, in why. And maybe, just maybe, they were right to fear. Because the line between life and death was thin in those days. Hunger blurs it. Loneliness stretches it. Faith tries to hold it. And when the world collapses, who are we to say what steps through the veil? The wind still rises over Wharram Percy. The grass bends as if stepped on. The trees whisper in ways that sound almost like names. And though the fire is long gone, the ash remains. We leave this place with the scent of charred earth in our mouths, the image of a broken skull scorched clean by human hands, and a question that burns deeper than bone. What are we willing to do to keep the dead from returning? But there are other ruins, other fears. Beyond the fog of English valleys lie the stone walls of Great Zimbabwe, a city once filled with music, incense, and gold, a kingdom now silent. There, we do not burn the dead. We bury memory in stone. And the ghosts do not rise. They wait, heavy and still behind granite walls. The wind arrives before dawn, brushing the stone walls with a hush that feels sacred. It moves through the grass like a whisper in the old tongue, stirring dry blades, lifting red dust into the air. On the high plateau of southeastern Africa, beneath a sky that flickers gold and violet, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe rise from the land like the bones of a forgotten god, silent, vast, unmoved. There is no torchlight here. Only the sun. It reveals the great enclosure first. Stone stacked without mortar, tens of thousands of granite blocks fitted with impossible precision, curving like a serpent around the earth. The outer wall stands as high as a cathedral. It casts no shadow of conquest, no crest of empire, and yet its silence commands more than any crown. This place was not built to intimidate, it was built to endure. They called it Zimbabwe, houses of stone. But these were no simple houses. This was the seat of a kingdom, the spiritual and political heart of the Shona people. A realm of kings, priests, traders, and mothers. A city that pulsed with gold, cattle, and incense. Where caravans came bearing silk from China, beads from India, porcelain and ivory. A crossroads of belief and ambition. The heart of it beats still in the hill complex. High above the plain, among granite boulders shaped by wind and time, the ancestral kings held their rituals. The path is narrow and steep, twisted like a vein through stone. One misstep, and the earth reminds you of its patience. Here, the Mambo, the king, sat wrapped in leopard skin, his breath sweet with clove and kola nut, his voice heavy with the weight of the ancestors. The Svikiro, the spirit medium, danced barefoot through the dust, their chants rising with the smoke of burnt herbs. Sacred birds circled above. The cry of the fish eagle was taken as a sign. The ancestors were listening. The stones remember all of this. You can feel it in your feet. Even in ruin, Great Zimbabwe is not empty. The air is thick with memory, rituals unspoken, coronations buried, prayers etched not in text but in geometry, in stone and silence. The walls curve like a womb, enclosing, not to defend, but to protect something sacred, something unseen. Inside, the acoustics are strange. A whisper carried in one alcove can be heard clear across the circle. Some say it was built that way, to carry the words of the Mambo to his people, or the voice of the spirit world into the ears of the chosen. This was not a world of parchment or iron. It was a world of spirit and stone. But stone alone cannot protect. By the 15th century, something shifts. Trade routes falter, power fragments. A rising kingdom to the north, Perhaps Mutapa draws the wealth away. Perhaps drought came, and the cattle could no longer graze. Or perhaps, as so often, power turned inward on itself. The city is abandoned, not burned, not conquered, left. The stones remain. And so come the outsiders. First whispers, then maps, then spades. European explorers arrive centuries later, unable, unwilling to believe that Africans could have built such grandeur. They invent theories, Arabs, Phoenicians, mythic outsiders who must have brought the skill. But the stones tell another story. The soapstone birds carved in abstract grace. The pottery styles linking site to site across the plateau. The oral traditions passed in secret, in song and dance. This was a kingdom born of this earth, shaped by it and returned to it. They desecrate the site. They loot, they dig, they take. But the truth will not yield. Great Zimbabwe is not a ruin of collapse. It is a monument of memory. And that memory lives still. Each year pilgrims come, descendants, scholars, children. They walk the corridors where once queens whispered to their daughters. They touch the walls. They light candles. They leave offerings, calabash, tobacco, coin. They do not look for ghosts. They come to honor. Because the spirit world, in Shona belief, is not distant. It is beneath the skin of the world, in the trees, the wind, the stones. The dead do not vanish. They step into another room, and the door remains open. Here, that door is wide. Even now, as the sun sets and the granite glows a soft gold, one can hear it. The low hum of drums carried by air, the shuffle of bare feet in dry grass, the faint cry of a hawk echoing across the hills. Perhaps it is only the wind, or perhaps it is the ancestors, watching still. The story does not end in stone, because the builders of Great Zimbabwe did not disappear. They moved. They carried their memory in blood, in story, in the shape of their homes and the rhythm of their songs. They became the bricklayers of distant cities, the keepers of clan totems, the singers of lineage. And even when empires fall, memory walks. In the next chapter, we follow that echo northward, to a place where incense burned in desert wind, where mosques rose from red dust, and where a market once roared with language and gold, and now lies buried beneath silence. We journey next to Gendebelo, where commerce, faith, and ruin are written not in stone, but in sand. The first light of morning spills across a land long forgotten. Dry wind over red earth, the hushed rustle of thorned acacia, shadows stretching across abandoned stone. Here, where the desert begins to whisper and the sky hangs wide and unbroken, the walls of Gendebelo crumble in silence. There are no guards now, no merchants calling their wares, no camels swaying under salt and spice, only the breath of time and the slow hush of sand reclaiming story. But once, this place was loud. It was here that Muslim traders from Harar met Christian emissaries from the Ethiopian highlands. Here that women laid down baskets of cardamom, and elders counted coins by the measure of the sun's descent. Here that minarets rose beside homes of mud, brick, and stone, their call to prayer braided with the voices of blacksmiths and shepherds. Gendebelo was not a city of gold, but of motion, of negotiation, of belief passing hand to hand like silver. And now it is dust. There is no chronicle that marks the fall, no final sermon, no battlefield soaked in blood. Gendebelo did not burn. It faded, a slow unraveling, like a prayer half finished, like a market day that never returned. Walk the ruins, and you still feel it, the rhythm of exchange. In the scattered beads buried beneath dry soil, in the cracked remnants of amphorae once filled with oil, in the faint imprint of footprints hardened by centuries of sun. Archaeologists found them beneath the topsoil, layers of domestic life, coin molds, dyed thread, cattle pens, tools still sharp enough to cut. A city that did not die in violence but was left behind like an open book never finished. Faith here was not divided by sword, it was woven. Gendebelo was a city of interlacing belief. The Harari, who followed Islam, built mosques with gentle arches. Inside, you can still see faint carvings in Ajami script, Arabic letters used to express local languages, prayers etched into stone not as conquest but as invitation. And the Christians who came did not arrive as invaders. They came as neighbors, as buyers, as allies. There are fragments of Orthodox icons found among the ruins, crosses carved into bone, candle holders shaped by calloused hands. At night, the city listened. The wind curled through alleys where children once played. A father might have whispered stories beneath a reed mat roof of saints and prophets, of kings who rode north, of merchants who never returned. A mother might have pressed her child's ear to her chest, her heart a rhythm older than faith itself. But the silence came, not in fire, in forgetting. A new trade route, a shift in reins, a decision made in some distant capital. And Gendebelo, too small to fight, too proud to beg, emptied. The people left in fragments. Some to the highlands, some to the eastern cities, some deeper into the desert. They took their language with them, their prayers, their stories. And what they could not carry, they buried beneath the dust. Even now, the land does not yield its secrets easily. The few who return do so with reverence. They kneel before the cracked arch of the mosque. They touch the stone where water once poured. They listen for the ghost of commerce in the silence. They speak softly, as if not to wake the dead, but to greet them. Because Gendebelo is not a ruin. It is a memory in mid-breath. A place where the idea of coexistence, of shared food, faith, and future was not a dream, but a daily act. Not perfect, not without tension, but real. In the shadow of rising empires and religious wars, this city reminds us of another way. Of faith not as wall, but as bridge. Of trade not as plunder, but as communion. The sand does not forget. It holds what we abandon. It guards what we neglect. And when the wind is just right, it unveils what we have chosen to lose. Now, Gendebelo lies beneath that sand, still, waiting. The mosque's minaret leans into sky like a finger raised not in warning, but in remembrance. The market square is silent, but its geometry remains. You can trace the stones where spices once spilled, where hands met in bargaining, where eyes locked over parchment and promise. And when the sun sinks low, the ruins glow, soft orange on sun-scorched stone, as if lit from within. We do not end here, because beyond the desert lies the sea, and across that water, in the stone veins of an ancient city named Acre, another story waits, of tunnels carved in desperation, of a Crusader world collapsing inward, of secrets hidden not in sand but beneath earth, where knights whispered vows in the dark, and faith, once again, moved underground. The torch goes out without warning. The flame gasps, flutters, and dies, leaving behind only the scent of smoke and stone. A hush falls, heavy as the weight of the earth itself. Darkness coils through the tunnel beneath Acre, the walls slick with moisture, the air dense with old breath. One step forward, and the foot sinks into silence, the kind of silence that remembers. We are beneath the city now, beneath the cobbled alleys and the sunlit arches of a place once crowned by cross and crescent, beneath the seagull cries and salt-stung breeze. Here, in these tunnels carved by Crusader hands, time does not move. It waits. This was a passage for secrets, for escape, for survival. When Acre fell in 1291, the Templars did not scream. They vanished, swallowed by stone and shadow. Their last stand was not on a battlefield, but beneath it. The city above had been their fortress, their prize, their sanctuary, the gateway to the Holy Land, walls thick enough to break the strongest siege, towers tall enough to challenge the sky. But strength is never permanent. The Mamluks came, with fire, with steel, with relentless tide, and the streets of Acre ran red. So the Templars turned downward. The tunnels beneath the city weren't built in haste. They had been carved over decades, maybe longer. A network of stone-veined corridors linking garrisons, armories, granaries. Every twist knew a purpose. Every turn bore intention. Water dripped from arched ceilings like a slow, steady clock. Iron rings still jut from the walls, once used to tie lanterns, ropes, prisoners. Down here, survival wore no armor. A knight in white mantle, dust-streaked and bloodied, pressed his ear to the cold wall. He listened, not for the enemy's step, but for silence, for that sacred pause between life and death where decision lives. He whispered not prayers, but names. Brothers lost above, brothers waiting below. The core of the tunnel leads west, from the Templar fortress to the port, the escape route, the last breath of a dying cause. But it was not only knights who passed through. The wounded, the fearful, the scribes with scrolls clutched to their chest, the children, the widowed, all moved through these damp halls, their torches flickering, faces ghost pale. They did not speak, only eyes moved, only breath counted time. The Templars had vowed poverty, chastity, obedience. But in Acre's fall, it was not purity that mattered, it was silence, discretion, loyalty to the last ember. In one chamber, the bones of a horse were found, its hooves sealed in the floor, its body curled as if asleep. A warhorse buried beneath stone, not as a relic, but as a companion. Perhaps it carried one of the last knights down into the dark. Perhaps it died with him, loyal even in collapse. The soil here is thick with reverence. These were not men immune to fear. They were not heroes of myth. They bled. They doubted. They cursed the sky and gripped their blades with shaking hands. But still, they stayed. When the towers fell, when the sea ran red, when the call to prayer echoed through conquered streets, they stayed beneath. Not to win, but to remember. Some say treasure lies buried in these tunnels. Gold, relics, the grail itself. But the real treasure is weightless. It is the silence. The carved cross barely visible in the wall. The worn patch where dozens of hands steadied themselves in darkness. The echo of a bootstep, a whispered oath. The Templars were hunted after Acre, branded heretics, scattered to winds. Their name became myth, their story twisted. But here, below, the stone does not lie. It carries their truth, not in words, but in presence. This tunnel was rediscovered by accident, like so many truths. A pipe burst, a floor gave way, and beneath the modern city, the past stirred. Archaeologists crawled through narrow openings with flashlights and trembling breath, their palms brushing walls still marked with soot. The air had not moved in centuries, and yet it welcomed them. Not with violence, but with memory. Each step downward is a journey into what endures, into how belief clings to stone long after breath has ceased, into how even in failure, meaning lingers. The Templars did not rise from Acre's ruins, but neither did they vanish. The tunnels remain. They do not boast. They do not shout. They wait. Outside, the sea crashes against the breakwater. The call of gulls returns. Tourists walk the narrow streets, unaware of the weight beneath their feet, of the vows spoken below, of the silence holding centuries of loyalty, fear, and final faith. And somewhere in a sealed-off section of tunnel, a single iron helm still rests, its face turned upward, as if watching for light that never came. The story winds forward, because where the Templars sought escape, others sought permanence. Across the sea, across the sand, across the ages, another city rose, older, deeper, buried in dunes. Kish, where kings once ruled in cuneiform and time was first measured in clay, where the ruins do not hide beneath, but emerge from the earth itself. And so we rise now, from tunnel to tablet, from whisper to sun, from acre to sumer. The sun rises without mercy over the plain. There is no shade, only shimmering heat, and the low hum of wind dragging sand across forgotten stone. In southern Iraq, where two rivers once cradled the first cities, the earth coughs up its memory grain by grain, and buried beneath that memory lies Kish, a city older than myth, heavier than legend. It is not the walls that speak here. It is the ground itself. Beneath the cracked soil, beneath the brittle roots of tamarisk trees and the bones of half-remembered kings, the city waits. Dust veils the ziggurat, its steps half swallowed by time. Tablets lie buried like prayers never heard. 1,000 years before Babylon rose, Kish had already whispered its truths to clay. And then silence. The opening moment is not one of conquest or collapse. It is a trowel striking stone in 1902. A French archaeologist bends beneath the desert sun and pulls a tablet from the soil. It is dry, flaked, but legible. The world's oldest known list of kings, etched in cuneiform, in a tongue as sharp as it is sacred. And at the top of that list, after the flood had swept over, kingship descended from heaven. Kish was the first city. Not Ur, not Babylon, Kish. And yet, no one remembers. Walk the mounds today and you'll hear nothing but wind. A rustle, perhaps, or the call of a distant crow. No voices, no bells. But the city is there. Not in walls, but in dust, in fragments of seal cylinders, tokens of commerce and power. In the shattered bowls once used to serve barley beer, still etched with names. Acre, Enmebaragesi. Names that held power when writing itself was still a miracle. This was not just a city of kings, it was a city of scribes. In Kish, writing was not ornament, it was command. Cuneiform symbols, pressed with reed into wet clay, baked by sun and preserved by time, bore contracts, hymns, sorrows. One tablet lists livestock owed to the temple. Another records the names of the dead. Another still, simple, small, records a song to the goddess Inanna, etched by a trembling hand, perhaps by a child learning the sacred forms. Language here was not voice, it was permanence. And yet nothing is permanent. The Euphrates shifted, the power moved south. Other cities, richer in water and ambition, rose. Kish faltered, its temples emptied, its walls sank. The scribes left, but the clay stayed. In the dry air, nothing rots, everything hardens. The tombs did not collapse, they settled. The tablets did not burn, they waited. And now, when you walk this ground, your foot may step on what once bore the will of kings. The symbolism is not lost. A city where the first kings of Sumer ruled forgotten. A city where time began according to its people buried. The cradle of kingship, now a mound of sand. But even lost things speak. A recent excavation unearthed a woman's burial, her bones wrapped in faded linen, her fingers curled around a small votive figurine. No gold, no crown, just clay, symbolic, humble. But beside her, a tablet. Not hers, perhaps, maybe buried by mistake. Or maybe left deliberately as a marker of identity, of lineage of story. And on that tablet, a name. Unfinished, half erased by time, but it bears the marks of faith. In Kish, burial was not just ritual, it was return. To be placed beneath the city was to be folded back into the story, to belong not to soil, but to lineage. The tension is here. We speak of lost civilizations as if they disappeared. But Kish did not vanish. It became sediment. Its ideas were carried, its symbols copied, its scribes taught those who would shape the future. It was Kish that gave kingship to the world. And it is Kish that teaches us what lasts. Not iron, not towers. Language, memory, dust. When the rains come, they carve small rivers into the mound. They drag clay and stone downward. Sometimes they reveal fragments, seals, bones, shards of a bowl once lifted in offering. Sometimes they bury it deeper. This is the rhythm of ruins. Exposure, erasure. And still, the desert holds her secrets close. There are no standing temples in Kish now. No pillars to photograph. Only the wind. Only the sound of breath beneath a scarf. Only the glint of sun off the ridged surface of a tablet that has not felt fingers in 4,000 years. What do we lose when cities fall? Not just stone, not just names. We lose questions, dreams, an entire way of seeing the world. And yet here, buried in a place where the first rulers declared their dominion, where the floodwaters once withdrew and life began again, we feel the first flicker of a truth that does not fade, that what is written remains, even if forgotten. Even if misread, even if scattered to wind and water and time. The last image is simple. A hand, dusty and trembling, lifting a clay tablet from the earth. A breeze moves through the ruins. The sun burns low. The city exhales. And somewhere beyond the sands, another door opens. This time not beneath stone, but across the sea, where a new empire waited, where towers rose from faith and fear, where the bells did not toll, but called to war. In the final chapter, we return to Europe. To a siege that would mark the end of chivalry, to warriors who stood against fire, to a last great war that tore the medieval world apart.